61%. That's how many U.S. businesses experienced a software supply chain attack in 2023, according to Gartner. This attack surface is constantly expanding. To secure your software supply chain, you first need to control it. JFrog offers an end-to-end platform that manages and controls the binaries and DevOps processes across the entire software development lifecycle. With JFrog, you can deliver trusted software with speed. Visit securityweekly.com/jfrog to learn more and take control of your software supply chain today.
Created in 2005 and hosted by security industry veterans, Paul Security Weekly is your source for in-depth coverage of the latest vulnerabilities, exploits, and security research. Our weekly security news discussion dives deep into the security issues we face today and potential solutions in a fun and lively atmosphere. Each week, we bring on guests from the security community to learn about their journey and discuss topics relevant to their work and research. You can also subscribe to our show by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe or look for Paul Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher. We've recorded a ton of content over the years, so we created Spotify playlists featuring some of our favorite episodes, including interviews with Marcus Random, John McAfee, and Chris Roberts, to name a few. You can find them at securityweekly.com/starter packs.
Welcome to day 2 of Black Hat 2024. I'm Jeff Mann, co-host on Paul Security Weekly. We are broadcasting live from the beautiful suite here at Four Seasons Hotel. It's still hot because it's Vegas in August. Why we do it in August, I have no idea. I'm here today talking with Danny Jenkins. He's co-founder and CEO of a company called ThreatLocker. Danny, welcome.
Thank you for having me on today.
How are you liking the show so far?
Great. It's busy. Every year we come here, it gets busier, more people, more heat.
I assume you guys have a booth on the trade room floor?
We have a very big booth and a lot of people down there at the moment. Expecting a busy...
One of these days I will try to get down there, but I'm doing these interviews most of the day. Danny, tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into cybersecurity and how you ended up starting this company called ThreatLocker.
So it started off before cybersecurity existed. I left school at 15. I started working in IT at 16. And I started off an apprenticeship and I worked very, very quickly up in the IT world. I worked at what would be known as an MSP today, but it wasn't called an MSP back then.
Gotcha.
I then worked corporate IT. And very quickly that became corporate IT security because I was at the head office of a multinational company and they suddenly had all these malware and issues related to security.
So what time frame are we talking?
We're talking, this was 2000. I think I started at corporate IT in 2001, I want to say.
Okay.
I started in IT in 1997.
Got you. Okay. I still have you beat by a little bit, but that's all right. I have most people beat. It's funny because back then, one of the arguments that we used to make when I came out into the private sector in 1997 and trying to convince companies, hey, if you're going to plug into this thing called the internet, you got to do something like to secure your stuff. And very quickly, the conversation became, where do you put security in an organization? And for whatever reason, they slapped it into IT, which I've always thought it was a bad idea. But all right, so you got into it. You sort of grew up through the ranks. What did you see that made you think we can do this better?
So I think the first thing I saw constant failure for decades.
Yep.
And it wasn't that significant. So if I go back to 2001, actually, I was working in corporate IT. I remember the love bug hitting the corporate network. I remember every machine getting done. And then 2002, we saw the blaster virus. These were real pain points from an IT person point of view, but they weren't pain points from a business point of view because my computer got a virus, the IT guy cleaned it, and that was kind of the mentality.
Right.
And for decades or for years over years, we just kept missing. And I think in 2014 was when I really realized we've got to change the way we do this. And it was the first ransomware recovery I actually worked on. So I spent about 4 years doing ethical hacking, but I'd say 2.5 of those turned into mostly ransomware recoveries because people would ask me to help with their ransomware recoveries.
Right.
And there was one in 2014 and it completely destroyed the business. They paid the ransom, they didn't get their data back. And suddenly it was much more important to detect all malware at 0 day. And that's really where we thought about ThreatLocker. How can we change this from a detection point of view to a protection where we actually block by default?
Do some prevention rather than just constantly cleaning up the mess.
Yeah, because it was impossible to detect everything that was out there. Right. And we've seen it get, and since 2014, it's just got worse and worse and worse and worse. Ransomware attacks are growing, malware attacks are growing, cyber attacks are growing. the misuse of applications. So by changing that paradigm to default deny as opposed to default allow, all we had to do was figure out how do we make that viable and simplistic for a business without interfering with their business.
So you've been around long enough to remember the whole concept of plug and play and screaming at, vendors to, could you please give us some secure configurations right out of the box? But of course, they wanted everything to work right out of the box.
And that's the problem. Developers write code to perform a function.
Right.
They don't think about writing code to stop someone performing a bad function.
Right.
And when you create things like that, all software has vulnerabilities, it has bugs and drivers, hardware sets, all allows misuse. I think we actually saw one even last year. We found a vulnerability in Apple, which their response was it was a feature where we could gain full control over a Mac just by intercepting the Bluetooth connection between the AirPods and the Mac. We were able to put malware, download files from it and everything.
Yeah. Those of us that are older kind of are not necessarily optimistic that this ever gets solved. I feel like sometimes we opened up this Pandora's box because we've created all this amazing technology that connects people and has instant access to information, and the idea of securing that information it seems like it's always been an afterthought, if it's thought about at all.
Yeah, and I don't know if it gets solved, but I think it gets better. And one of the previous company I ran before this was an email security company.
Okay.
And at the time, if we go back to the first decade of the century, email security, spam, Viagra, all sorts of crap that would fill up all the mailboxes. And it was killing businesses and they couldn't get to the end of it. And email security technologies got so advanced when it came to filtering out spam. And now there's a whole bunch of new issues with email security, but spam filtering made it unviable for them to stay in business.
Right.
So, and yes, there's still spam today, but it's not nearly as bad as it was at its peak in 2010 or whatever that may have been. The same applies with ransomware. These guys are business operators. If we can make their life difficult and they can't make money doing this, then we win in general. No, it's never going to be perfect, but we can make it better. It just means taking steps, implementing controls that really makes their life hell. And if you put big, strong bolts on your doors, you put security cameras, you got an alarm system, and someone tries to break in and they kick the door and they get the crowbar and it won't open, they just give up. They go to the neighbor. And that's kind of what we need to do. It's not impenetrable, but if you have security that's of a least privilege, it makes it harder for them to do their job, and you're now the least likely person to be attacked. And eventually they just go out of business, like the spammers did.
Yeah, I mean, I learned cybersecurity, and we didn't call it that back then. We called it initially communication security, then information security, but in the DoD. And that was one of those neglected principles that didn't seem to translate well into the private sector, is the idea of you don't have to lock everything down so it's impenetrable. Just make it not worth the while of the attacker or the bad guy to even bother. So very similar to the analogy you just said. I used to talk about, if there's a thief driving into a neighborhood, he's looking for the house that's easiest to break into and steal stuff, not necessarily, that house clearly has the best things. But he was looking also for the levels of defenses and protections, and it's nearly impossible to defend a house against somebody that really, really wants to get in there. There's always the second floor, there's the back doors, I had somebody tell me one time when I was giving them the analogy, heck, most houses are built with siding and drywall, just cut a hole in the wall. I'm like, yeah, that's true. So you're understanding sort of older original concepts. You started this company called Threat Locker. You've been in business a while. You've survived the whole COVID thing. What are you guys doing today? What are you doing right now to try to help organizations be better and survive, really?
So what we've done is we've built this endpoint protection platform. And rather than building it on the idea of detecting threats, we built it on the idea of, okay, what is malware? Malware is software. What if we could block all software except the software that they need? And then we've dealt with those issues because there's a whole bunch of new issues with updates and everything else around that. So we've dealt with those issues rather than trying to deal with the malware issue. And then by default, we block ransomware and malware. And we saw that with Exchange vulnerability. We've seen it with the Kaseya vulnerability in 2021. We've seen it over and over again. WannaCry was the first big success. And it was at that point when WannaCry came out, we knew that we were on something really, really big because it was very, very successful. And then we've extended that, and it's a whole platform. So it's not just, hey, blocking software, but what does the software that you run need to do? So you can deploy threat locker and it'll say, this is all the apps on your machine. Everyone says they've got 10 apps. They've normally got 300 because they don't realize about that Logitech.
Especially if it's Windows.
Yeah, Logitech webcam support app. And then we'll show them that this was made in China, this was made in Russia, this is what this application has access to. PowerShell has access to all of these files and it can be used for this. But what we'll do is we'll say, this is what we recommend you give it access to. So we'll actually put controls, we'll ring fence those applications and put controls around them. And then we'll go into storage and network controls. And yes, we have an EDR and we have an MDR that backs that up. Yeah. But the idea of detection is when you messed up on the protection. Detection is only relevant if you don't have security in place in the first place. Right. I don't believe detection is security. It's an alarm. Someone just broke into your house.
Right.
And hopefully you get them out before they steal too much.
Right. Well, it might be semantic, but I think detection is part of security because I think all the things that you do to prevent bad things from happening, locking down, securing all the things, is sort of table stakes. And to me, security is really what you do to figure out something bad's going wrong. But I'm a little bit idealistic, and I come from a DoD background where I think pragmatically in the real world, in the private sector, more and more people need things that just work because the idea of having to constantly be vigilant and detecting and protecting.
You can't keep up. Well, and I think the point is a burglar alarm in your house isn't going to stop somebody breaking in, but it may make them leave and it may stop them. And that's the idea of detection. And we have probably, or arguably, the best MDR in the world. We've got US-based MDR that responds on average in 23 seconds. Wow. So we have that, but every time we get an alert, it's normally because something else was configured wrong or allowed wrong on the other side because the IT guy allowed TeamViewer, or despite the fact that all the tools were there, they opened RDP on the internet or something like that. So it's important, but it should be the backup plan and not the core of how you stop people getting into your environment.
Gotcha. What do you find to be your key market, the sweet spot for people that are wanting to use your products?
So I think the bigger area, it ranges. So we do very well in small businesses through managed IT companies. Okay. But we also do very well in large enterprises, banks, hospitals. JetBlue is a customer of ours, and they're very, very successful, and they're deployed everywhere. So we have this kind of range across the board. Mm-hmm. I think our target audience is really IT departments or security departments that have personnel. So if it's a small business, like a dental office that doesn't have their own IT team, we're targeting their provider. Right. If it's a large enterprise, and we do really well in a lot of the large enterprise, we've got quite a lot in aviation, certainly aviation that's not gone down this week, but and that's really where we're coming from, is get it to the IT people. And I think the sweet spot for us is probably anything from 500 up to 100,000, 200,000 endpoints.
Gotcha. I'm curious, this is a little bit maybe off topic, but just given your background growing up through corporate IT and just seeing all the frustrations and challenges and not intending to disparage anybody because it could have happened to anybody, but what is your take on things that happened a couple weeks ago that kind of caused a few significant outages across the world?
So I think, first of all, I mean, it's what keeps me up at night.
Right. Because it wasn't really it wasn't a security issue.
No, it was. It
was an IT issue.
It was a infrastructure issue, we'd call it. But I think that there are things. First of all, hindsight's 2020. It's very easy to say 2020. This should have been done different. This should have been done different. And it's what keeps me up at night. We think about every possible chain, and we've built constraints into our update process. We have independent teams that push shards on servers to make sure everything's validated. QA has a separate. Right. So we've done those things. I think the challenges and what happened 2 weeks ago woke up the world. And there's two problems at the cause of this. One is we're updating security solutions that are core into the operating system 10 times a day because we have to.
Right.
And we have to do that to stop threats. And that's back to the point of we shouldn't be chasing threats that much. We can't rely on 10, 12 updates a day
Right.
where mistakes can be made.
Right.
I think it could have been a lot worse. And that's what everyone's underestimated. If this had been a ransomware attack or something at that scale, we wouldn't be talking about a week to get people up and running. We're talking about months or years
Right.
in a lot of business. So it could have been a lot worse. It wasn't a security incident, but it was a change control issue. And it's...
I mean, I do PCI. I've been doing PCI for 20 years, which is a standard that walks through all the things that you should do to create a secure environment. And, I could just think of a half dozen things that a particular company probably wasn't doing or kind of got a little bit lax. I'm sure, and again, I'm not meaning to disparage them, I'm sure there was a cascading, a bunch of little things that happened over time that created that perfect storm. But most companies out there are in that same boat.
Oh, of course. And it scares me. And it's why we put so many checks and balances in place and we do so many updates slowly, because what I imagine happened, and the update file that was pushed out, it wasn't half a file, but it was half the size of the regular file,
right,
which indicates to me that somebody copied the wrong file onto the server. And now the way that those files were loaded is Microsoft require you to sign drivers. So whenever you make a change to your driver, you have to submit your driver to Microsoft with its essentially PBB file to review the source code. And they spit you back a signed driver from Microsoft to say, hey, we've vetted this driver. It's not a security risk. You're now allowed to push this out to our customers.
Right.
And that process is a pain in the backside, to say the least. However, it means you're slowed down updating your driver. So what most security companies do is they'll run their business logic in a service and they'll have the driver hooking into the service.
Gotcha.
What seemed to happen in this case is the instructions, the driver was almost like an empty shell that would actually pull instructions and logic into it. And that, when it got something it didn't expect, it crashed.
Right.
Because it didn't know how to handle that set of data. So if we think about, well, what could have been done, and hindsight's always 2020, we probably could have had a scenario where the driver had better error control in it. The driver could have also just sent the data to the service to do processing. The update process could have been validated and checked better. And it's very easy to say in hindsight, but one of the things that we implemented was this idea of we have separate shards, and because at the end of the day, at some point, one guy one person has to copy this file to a server.
Right.
And then that server gets pushed. It could have been pushed in a slower metric. It could have had lower risk clients push first, or things that aren't going to affect critical infrastructure. But the other thing that could be done is validation of that file from two other departments, which is the way we do it. So that file, the guy who pushes it can't, if he makes a mistake, all that's going to happen is the agent on the computer is going to say, this file isn't valid, and discard it.
Right.
And that's probably what should have happened. But hindsight's always easy to say after the fact. It keeps me up at night, this stuff. And we put so many controls to make sure they happen. And also don't have so many updates. Find a security solution that doesn't require 12 updates a day.
Right. Well, I mean, part of the principles of security that I learned years ago is, or have witnessed, is we learn from our mistakes and we always get better as a culture and as an industry. Appreciate your time today. We've run out of time. I appreciate the context and the background, and having come out of the trenches, I get the sense that you have a really good feel for what works and what doesn't. And we encourage everybody to check out ThreatLocker and this idea and this approach of doing things a little bit differently. If you want to get more information, go to securityweekly.com /ThreatLocker BH for Black Hat. Danny, thanks for your time today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great.
Welcome back to the coverage of Black Hat 2024, brought to you by CRA TV. On behalf of Cyber Risk Alliance, today with me is Nikos Kiourtis, the Chief Technology Officer at Quokka. And some of you may be familiar with the name from a past life, right? Which was CryptoWire.
CryptoWire, yes.
Right. But welcome, Nikos. I'm glad you were able to join us with Quokka today.
Thank you for having me.
And this is a fascinating subject. We're going to talk about mobile application security.
Yep.
Right? And applications are completely ingrained in our day-to-day lives, not only in professional side, but also on the personal side. So I'm curious to what do you find intriguing about the mix of applications that end up being on an enterprise device?
Yeah. So in order to understand the risks that we have on mobile devices, if I may put it this way, we need to understand what mobile devices have evolved to be lately. So as you said, we have a mix of personal apps and company-owned apps. In many cases, these apps are basically our identity for certain services. So that is very interesting because it used to be that these applications are just, a tool to either a game or something to have fun with. Now we do so much more with this. So because of their high value target that are on our devices, these are now the new endpoint. The data that is contained in these applications is the high value target. It's not about compromising the device. No, the bad actors want your device to work. They just want the data in your device.
True.
So that is what is most interesting to me, that it used to be the case that when we had a desktop computer, somebody would try to, encrypt our files, make it, render it useless with a virus or, attack it in some other way. But now they're like, no, we want to go undetected. We just want to siphon your data and use it for our own purposes, whatever that is.
Well, and following up with that, then what are some of the top mobile application security challenges that come up right now?
Yeah, challenges or risks of the app. So
Either way,
Yeah.
well, risks. Let's go with the risks.
Yeah, let's go with the risks. So we have a lot of categories of applications that we have identified that are problematic. For example, you can have overprivileged applications.
Okay.
These applications require more privilege than what they want, more permissions, if I might put it this way, or they could be applications that come pre-installed in your phone as part of whatever the vendor installed when you got the device. Now, if those are not protected properly, they have access to sensitive information because they come pre-installed on the phone. That is something that other applications can get without the vendor initially wanted. For example, you can have an application that can get your contacts without you knowing, without ever seeing a dialog box that says, hey, this application will have access to your contacts.
Right.
You can have applications that are what we call harvester applications.
Okay.
These usually want a lot of access in your device. And what they do is that they just harvest your data, as much data as they can, send it to a remote endpoint for profiling the user, and then either doing targeted ads or you name it, whatever else. Think that you could know the habits of general population at some point. That is very powerful. You could shape opinions. You can do whatever it is you want. We have leaky applications that leak your private information in locations that should be otherwise protected. Let's say your call log, your SMS messages. An example of these applications that actually came up recently with some research from Zimperium is applications that are targeted for stealing two-factor authentication codes,
Okay.
which is like a huge nightmare. And that's probably why most companies don't want you to have two-factor authentication via an SMS. They usually require some authenticator app to protect it. And there's like 10 categories. I can't remember all of them. Like probably the most trying to remember. Yeah.
Well, the overprivileged, because that is such an easy thing for the end user. If they're installing the application, they don't even care about what privileges are.
Yeah, and most of the times, you know what happens? You usually don't see, you might see that the application is asking for some permission. You might grant it at the time, and then you forget. Because, you haven't been using that application so much. It's there, but the application still has access to that protected resource that you gave it. Apple and Google are trying to be more, are trying to alert the users about this. For example, the location access.
Okay.
iPhones and Android phones lately have been telling you, hey, this application has access to your location. Do you see what information it's getting? Do you still want that? But you can't do this for every permission that you grant on your device. The hard reality is that now that we're using devices constantly, we need to be more alert about what permissions we give them and how we utilize them. Meaning, we need to just question a little bit, not install every application out there, give them all the permissions they want. Oh, because another thing, we also have colluding apps, applications that basically share information between them. So we assume that the application we have on our phone will only run when we run them. But it's highly probable that another application can ask information from the ones that it knows have sensitive information and get it.
Fair.
So even though we're not using the other apps at this point, they can still, give them some information based on the privilege they have been given.
So I'm curious, especially speaking about the harvester apps. Do you have any research or information on how often the Harvester apps come from free apps versus paid or
Oh,
enterprise?
it's usually free apps.
It's usually not free
Yeah.
apps, right? Okay.
It's because here's the sorry, not the model. Here's the how you do it. You create a useful not a useful service. You think about something that would be appealing to the users. You set it up. You create a nice website. People believe it because they see some legitimate website. The app is nice. It looks professional.
Mhm.
It asks for your information, and then you willingly give it because you like the app. And
Absolutely.
the app harvests all your information. I don't want to name specific apps, but you get the point. You get how this, yeah.
I was doing research last week on a set of apps from one developer that offered free services, very attractive
Mhm.
free services.
Is there-
And exactly.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be just one application. You can have, if the company behind is big, you can have a lot of apps that do the same thing. And all of them can be colluding afterwards and exchange information.
Oh, yeah. And I would say, like, for this one, when I was doing research on this, it was 3 separate apps. I almost felt that I could pick up on them going cha-ching every time. Every time somebody was using their free app and getting all of these fantastic services. So one other risk then, or one app, what is a chatty app? What do you mean?
Oh, yes. A chat application. That's one of the other risks. So chat applications are the ones that want to chat with other users. Basically, the ones that have access to our SMS messages or can interact with the phone. That's a very high privileged operation, obviously,
Okay.
because giving the application the ability to send an SMS message on your behalf, that's like one of the not worst things. That's one of the most privileged things you can do. So these apps, if they're not protected, you can think of an app that, for example, helps you screen spam callers.
Okay.
They would need that permission. Now, we have seen applications like that actually have this in their privacy policy, that in order to improve our service, we send all the numbers that come to you to our servers back wherever that is.
Understood. Right.
But hey, why would an application know who it is, who is calling me, and all the phone numbers or who I'm calling? So that's, yeah, you can see the risk there. I don't want to say a lot of things. I don't want to name the app. Yeah.
I think you're very well describing
Yeah, I'm trying to.
the potential issue at hand.
Yeah, but the idea is that you can't be giving all this information willingly to an entity that actually tells you, hey, I'm going to do this to improve my service, and basically all your data belongs to me
Mhm.
at this point.
So from your view, what can organizations do to protect themselves?
Yeah, so first of all, they need to raise awareness. The employees need to know, and all of us need to know how to use a mobile device, meaning that it's not just, it has all our private information there, all our personal data. We need to make sure that we don't install every application that looks nice and has nice reviews.
Yeah.
Of course, you wouldn't know what the application is doing unless you test it, which is a separate category. We'll talk about that later. But
Okay.
at the very least, we should not decrease the security posture of the device, meaning we want to sideload an application that's not on the official store because it looks nice and it's offered by another website. We need to question that. Is that legitimate? Is that good?
Mhm.
Why is it not in the official app store? We need to make sure that we don't install apps that we will never use because they can collude with each other, as I mentioned. Potentially another thing which is tedious, but it's a good security practice, we should probably review all the permissions we give the applications and make sure that,
Sure.
do I need it? Do I still need this app? Or give this type of access to this application? Now that's at the, things like that. Now that's at the personal level. At the corporate level, obviously, the employees need to be trained that this is highly sensitive and you're using it constantly and basically increase our attack surface. And they need to have a solution in place that tests the applications and the mobile fleet that they have.
Okay. So then what solutions does Quokka offer?
We have two solutions for this. We have two product lines. One is called the QMust product line, which is for testing individual apps. Or if you are a developer, it's testing the application as it is being developed to make sure that it's secure and basically prevent security issues in the application before it is released in the App Store or after. And we have the QScout offering, which is for the enterprise. And that maps the entire mobile fleet, the applications installed, and
Really?
highlights the risks. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
All these categories that I mentioned, you can set policies, you can basically get insights into a application threat feed, if I may put it this way. What's going on in your mobile fleet?
So for you or the team at Quokka, especially with all of the research and real life data that you're getting back from your customers,
Mhm.
what have you found to be the most helpful or the time reduction for security teams at enterprise level when they are using, say, QScout?
Yeah. So definitely being proactive about setting policies that would not allow them to install certain kinds of applications before they enter the fleet, and then they have to worry about what is our exposure, what not. Not just QScout. A lot of developers have reached out to us, big companies that are regulated and need to be compliant from a security perspective, health industry, banking industry, these types of businesses, to make sure that the applications do not have risks, or how do they fare when being installed in a device with other apps there, because we can test applications as a group and not just a single application by itself.
And now that's different. You're talking about testing it differently than during development.
Basically, identifying what's the exposure with app collusion is what I mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the idea is that basically here that you need to prevent a security issue from entering your app before it's released. That's what I'm trying to get at. That's the best thing that they can do. And it's a no-brainer, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's what all in the security field desire.
It's not going to happen 100%, obviously, but don't get me wrong. It's not like, this is 100% correct, but most of them are caught.
And so quickly, like once an app has been released to the public, like is there ongoing testing or ways that, go ahead.
Yeah, I just agree with you. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Ongoing testing as new versions are updated. Can you speak about that? Yeah,
so this application in our line of products can be put in a watch list so that new versions are discovered and tested as they are released. Or if it's the developer that has bought a QMAS solution, they can submit it before releasing it, the pre-release of the new version. But from a company perspective, if they have bought the QScout product, all their applications are being put in a watch list so they know what to expect.
Oh, that's fantastic. So what are some of your recent discoveries at Quokka?
Yeah, so we have more than 230 CVs as of today.
Really?
Yeah.
I would say
Yes, thank you. Our latest discoveries are for a mobile application that actually, it's something that I already mentioned, leaks call information and SMS information at the application log, so other applications can grab it, or even somebody can connect your phone and pick it up. That should be limited in the scope of the app, but it's not due to bad coding. And the other one is a presentation that we're doing at DEF CON from one of our principal R&D researchers. It is about a major mobile manufacturer that had some issues leaking the cell tower information that can compromise your location. Not leaking, sorry. Making this easily accessible to other applications when it should have been protected. Meaning, the proper safeguards are not in place.
Right, right. So
I don't say more because the presentation is ongoing this Friday.
It's Friday here at DEF CON, and it'll be
Ryan
Johnson.
Ryan Johnson, yes.
And I will mention the title of it is Android App Usage and Cell Tower Locations, Private, Sensitive, Available to Anyone.
Yeah, and that's the whole point. The available to anyone is the big thing. Question here, yeah.
That's the huge concern right there. Well, this has been fascinating. I will say in my research on Quokka too, I was really intrigued by the focus on fintech applications and even mobile gaming, and being able to provide I feel like it's so much more security for whether it's the enterprise that's just using other applications that were developed not by them, not proprietary applications, but also your help while developing their proprietary applications. Nikos, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I wish we had more time because we have a lot of questions.
So to our lovely audience, if you can't stick around for the rest of the live stream, or if you are catching this afterwards, please head over to securityweekly.com/black-hat to find all of the Black Hat coverage by Cyber Risk Alliance. And be sure to check out https://securityweekly.com/Quokka, which is QUOKKA Black Hat BH. Thank you for joining us, and Nikos again. Thank you for coming.